Hi everyone, my name's Purvi Makwana. I'm a consultant at Opalwave and I've been involved in implementing a few of these IFRS 16 solutions. So in today's session, we're going to go through the overview of the solution in a scenario where it's already been deployed. And we're going to start by looking at inputting lease parameters such as central discount rates and central depreciation rates. And then we're going to go through creating a new lease and adding payments to the lease, calculating costs associated with the leases, and then running a translation to convert from lease currency into local currency and reporting currency. And then finally, after that we'll look at moving into the consolidation model and then look at making a revision to the lease that's been created. Okay, so we'll begin in this template, IFI 001, lease parameters. In this template, we can input the central discount rates, and this is when you don't want to specify a discount rate against each lease. And you can also add in central depreciation rates in the case where a company doesn't want to depreciate the asset across the life of the lease and they want to enter specific asset depreciation rates. So to start with, we just make some selections here in the menu. I'm going to keep the category as actual. I'm going to have a lease starting from March 2019, so I'll leave that as the start date. And I'm going to pick an entity. So at the moment, the system is configured so that the fiscal year begins in 2019, and the IFRS 16 transition date is January 2019. Okay, so once I've refreshed the workbook, I can enter discount rates against the lease entity and the lease asset type. At the moment, this is how the system's been configured. It's also possible to put discount rates against specific currencies or against the lease length, but I'll go through that in a later session. So I've already got some rates in here, but I could put this and make a change and then just save the data. Then later on, when we create the lease and run the calculations, it will pull through this discount rate. There's the option here to have the central depreciation rates put in, but I'm going to leave that for now. I'm just going to use lease specific depreciation rates. Okay, so we don't need this template anymore, so we can move on to the next section. So now I'm going to open IFI 002, create leases. This template is used to create lease members in the LSE ref dimension. And then once the lease is created, we can add any comments against it. And then later on, we can add payments against this lease. So once again, I'm going to use the category actual and then hit refresh workbook, and that will update all of the reports. Okay, so here we don't need to worry about these grey cells here, we just fill in the white ones. So I'll create a printer lease. And you'll notice that there's validation checks throughout this template, so everything's flagged up orange if it needs to be filled in or if it's incorrect. And when this is valid, we'll be able to click Add New Leases. So I'll start by creating a lease that begins today. And I'll have the lease ending in 2 years' time. And I'll make this a monthly lease. We can choose monthly, quarterly, or yearly as the payment frequency. So this lease duration check automatically calculates how many lease periods there are going to be. So just notice that these dates are inclusive. So if I change this to 13th of March 2021, then it would make it 25. It'd be 2 years plus an extra day. For these, we can make a selection by double-clicking on them, and then it should open up all of the options that we have for the asset type. So this is a printer, so that goes under office equipment. There's also a tab here called Available Assignments, and that displays all of the options for what you could put in that section. The lease currency is a transactional currency, so it uses the normal 3-digit currency code prefixed with L_. So I'm going to make one in LGBP. What will happen later on is we'll translate this from LGBP into GBP for use in reporting. And I'll just pick an entity. I'll leave the intercompany partner as I none because it's not an intercompany lease. And if this lease had a parent lease, then I could pick the parent here, but I'm going to leave it as lease single. This sublease option here is just a flag, so you can say yes or no as to whether or not this lease we're creating is a sublease. And this flag is whether or not it's IFRS 16 applicable, which in our case it will be because it's not a short-term or low-value lease. We can ignore the lease transition option column for now, because this is used when you're bulk loading your leases at transition. So you can pick from partially A, B, or fully retrospective, but we're creating a lease after transition, so this isn't applicable. So I'm going to use a lease depreciation rate type, so the asset cost will be depreciated across the life of the lease. And we're going to use central discount rate types, which means we don't need to fill in an annual discount rate percentage here. But if we did select lease here, then this would need filling in. For the lease payment point, we can choose to pay in advance or in arrears. So this is whether the payment occurs at the beginning or the end of the period. I'm going to make one in advance. And then here we just enter what the lease payment is going to be. So I'll just put £30 for now. This autofill option determines how this payment value here is going to be spread across all of the 24 lease periods. So we can choose to copy the same value across it, manually enter payments in each of the periods, or spread this value across the different periods of the lease. So I'm going to choose to copy it, and we'll see this option come back later on in the next template. There's also the option to add fixed percentage increases, fixed value increases, and a payment increase frequency, and there are autofill options for these as well. I'm going to leave them as blank for now. And then here we have a cost center column where a cost center ID can be entered. This isn't necessarily a BPC ID, this is just something that a customer might want to use to be able to reference the lease with. And then these following 10 properties are customer specific properties that can be configured to be whatever they need to store against the lease. They're not using any calculations or anything, they just store values such as a license number or a personnel number. But any number of these can be used, they don't have to configure all 10. And then this final column here is lease document, where you can enter an external URL for any lease documents you might want to attach, so a SharePoint URL, for example, or you can have a file name for a file in a BPC document library. I'll explain in a later session how you configure whether or not it's going to be expecting a URL to be input here or a file name. And then once everything that's compulsory has been put in, we should be able to create our lease, and it automatically generates a member ID. All monthly leases are prefixed with M, quarterly leases are prefixed with Q, and yearly leases are prefixed with Y. Before you click Add New Leases, just check that this is valid here and that there aren't any error messages showing up. If this is invalid, we can scroll to the end and check the error message column, but we don't have any errors at the moment. If at any point you did want to start over, you can click the Reset Input Form button and that will clear everything that's already here. So I'm going to click Add New Leases. So what this is doing is it's triggered a data manager package to run, and it's going to be creating this lease member in the LSE ref dimension. So it's creating both master data, master data and transactional data. So it says that's succeeded now. We can go check that it does in fact exist in the LSE ref dimension. And there it is, it's the printer lease ending in 17. Okay, so now our lease has been created. We click this refresh metadata button. This is so that when we go into the next report, it picks up this lease. You also need to make sure that before you add any new leases, you do refresh the metadata and refresh the report, because otherwise it will duplicate this member ID and it will start writing over the data stored against this lease. There will be an error message that will pop up. The system will detect that, but you do need to make sure and be aware of that. Okay, so this is showing all of the leases that are currently in our IFRS 16 system. If I select leases created today, it should hopefully just show me the lease we've made just now. And there it is, our printer lease. And then there's an option here to add a comment against the lease if we want to. And then we just click the Save Data button to save that comment. So now our lease has been created and we can enter payments against it. So we can close this template down and open up IFI 003. Okay, so in this lease input template, we can enter lease payment data and service fee data, as well as any initial lease costs, and then we can run calculations and view the results in a report. So once again, I'll pick the actual category. This is the entity we create the lease in, and the lease begins in March 2019. And the lease reference type needs to be selected as monthly because this is a monthly lease. And then we refresh the workbook. Okay, so this input form is showing our printer lease with all of these payment periods. Because I selected monthly, it's displaying every month. If I selected quarterly, it would display all of the quarters from the start of the lease to the end of the lease. And here is the payment value we entered earlier, along with our copy autofill type. If I did want to change this now, I do have that option here. So what I'm going to do now is press this autofill data button, and that will automatically fill in the lease payments up until the end of the lease. If I wanted to add any service fee data or payment increases, I could do that too, but I'm going to leave that out for now. Also, you can see here that it's picked up that discount rate we saved earlier and calculated a depreciation rate for this lease. So now we can click the Save Data button to save the payments against the lease. So in this next tab, we can enter any costs associated with the lease and have a residual guarantee fee in the case where a lease falls below the residual guarantee. But I'm going to leave all of these as blank for now. And so the next step is to calculate the lease costs. So we make sure these are the same as our menu selections. We have an actual category. This is our entity. We have a monthly lease. And then we want to run these calculations from the start of the lease, so that's March 2019, up until the end of the lease, which is March 2021. And then we run the calculation. So this calculation takes roughly a minute per year. And what it's doing is calculating the accrued depreciation, the cost, the net book value, and the lease liability. So far we've created our lease in the LSE ref dimension and we've added payment data for it. So now we're just waiting for the cost calculations to run. The next step after this would be to translate the lease into reporting currency and local currency. So we'll just wait for this package to finish running. Okay, so now our calculations should have run. So if I refresh this report, we should see our printer lease. Okay, so here's our lease, and it's calculated all of the costs for the lease right up until the end of the lease. And you'll notice that the lease liability and the net book value zero out. Okay, so now that we have all of these account values in lease currency, we need to translate it into local and reporting currency. So I'll press the Translate Lease Costs button. Again, make sure we have the correct selections here. Run the the conversion from the start of the lease up until the end of the lease. And then run the package. So because our lease is in LGBP, this is basically just going to be a one-to-one conversion from LGBP into GBP. And then we'll be able to view the results of this translation in the report IFR 001. This will again take about 2 minutes because we have a 2-year lease. Okay, so that's finished running now, so we can close this report down. And open up IFI 001 lease report. So from here we'll be able to view the translated lease data and also trigger a data manager package that will push the data from the IFRS 16 model into the existing consolidation model. Okay, so once again the category is actual, this is our entity, the lease starts in March, and the currency we want to view the results of the lease calculation is in GBP. So then I'll refresh this workbook. Okay, so in this report we can see the translated lease accounts, and these are all year-to-date accounts, so we can see even though the lease ends, it continues to pull the values through till the end of 2021. Okay, so the next step is to transfer this data into the consolidation model. So in this sheet here we can see all of the data in our model, and then in a moment we'll be able to view it in the consolidation model. So we'll click the transfer lease data option. Once again running it from the start of the lease till the end of the lease. So the mapping of accounts from the IFRS 16 model to the consolidation model is done using various dimension properties, and I'll go through how all of that mapping is done in a later session. Okay, so now if I refresh this report in the consolidation model, we should see that the lease data has moved across. There we go, and we can see that our balance sheet is balanced. Okay, so far we've gone and created a lease, run the cost calculations, translated the lease from lease currency into local currency and reporting currency, and we've moved it all into the consolidation model. The final thing we're going to go over is creating a revision to an existing lease. So to do that, I need to open up the lease management template so we can close this down. And open up IFRS 004 lease management. So in this report, we can view lease details at a summary level and also look at individual leases at a detailed level. And then we can make revisions to these leases as well. So we make our selections here in the menu once again and refresh the workbook. Okay, so this report would be displaying all of the leases that have been created in our entity. We've just got this one printer lease here. So if I double click on that, it will show me this lease in more detail. Okay, so now say it's December 2020 and we want to make a revision to our lease, say we want to extend it by a year. We'd put in our revision start date. And then the amount of periods you want to revise. So now instead of ending in March 2021, it will end in March 2022. So it automatically calculates the end date. And then we press the new lease revision button here. So this next report that's going to show, input form is going to display the current revision and then the new revision that you're making. Okay, so you can see this has got the periods from the current revision, and this is going to be our revised lease. So I'm going to use the same payment method, 30, and copy that across. And then press the autofill data button. Also notice this discount rate has been pulled through again. When you have a central discount rate for a lease and you want to make a revision, you need to make sure that the discount rate has been entered also against the start of the revision. So December 2020, I've input a discount rate of 5.1 as well. Okay, so once you've entered your payments, you can click the Save Data button, and you can also add other service fee and percentage increase information if you want to. If you wanted to terminate the lease early, you'd create the revision but just not enter any payment information and just click Save Data. And then in the next tab, we have the option to add any lease costs as well, like we did the first time when we created the lease in IFRS 002. And once again, I'm just going to leave these as blank, and then calculate the lease costs again. So this time I'm going to run it from the start of the revision, so that's December 2020, up until when the lease ends now, so that's March 2022, and then run this package. So after this package is run, we'll be able to view our revised lease costs, and we'll see that our lease now ends in March 2022. Okay. So in this revision history worksheet here, we can see all of the revisions that have been made to this lease. So this was the initial lease, and then these are the revised periods that we've just entered. And if we go back to this single lease report and refresh it, we should see our new calculations. So we can see our lease now goes on until the end of February 2022. Okay, so we've created a lease, calculated costs, translated the lease currency, moved it to consolidation, and made a revision. At this point, we've only just calculated the costs. We now need to translate this again for the revised lease period, so from December 2020 until March 2022. And then to view the results of this translation, we'll have to go back to the template IFR 001. Okay. So in this report, we need to pick the time the lease starts. So it was March 2019. and the currency is still GBP, and that was our entity. So let me refresh the workbook. And now the lease goes on until December 2022. Okay, so that's the end of that session. I could also move this into the consolidation model again if I wanted to update things there. Also, I found with some of the customers, they don't necessarily want to transfer all the data at once. You can transfer one period at a time if you want to into the consolidation model. Yeah, so that's the end of that session.